And then we move on to the next thing Jesus said, and that's prayer. Now, as I was doing this, I kind of remembered a lot of times they would teach, or preachers would teach, a believing and receiving method. And when I was going on this, I was thinking, well, I've got more. I don't just have the believing, I'm done with the believing. It should be time to move on to the receiving, right? No, there's things in between that. And I let him know that I was going to do this, but I want to give an illustration, and everybody sees, you can look at him and stare at him. There's my best friend Joe back there. And I've known Joe for a while. I've known him for a long time. I really know him. He's my best friend. And I believe, without a doubt, that he can give me $2. I believe that. I've seen your wallet. I know that you can give me $2. I believe that. So, okay, so is everybody watching? I'm believing. I have not received. And the reason I find that really works between the believing and receiving is asking. And as we get to prayer, that's what I find. And if a lot of us are honest with ourselves. Now, prayer is talking to God, but a lot of times when we go in prayer, it is asking. A lot of times when we go to God, that's what prayer is asking. Now, unlike men, God knows, and we find this in the Bible, and go ahead and have you turn to it. And that is in Matthew 6:8. Therefore, do not be like them, for your Father knows the things you have need of before you ask in Him. Now, and a lot of us as Christians have heard this and realized this, that God knows everything we could ask of. Anything we need, He knows it already. And that's one of the main reasons we get this from this verse. And this is Jesus actually talking in this. He says, therefore, do not be like them, for your Father knows the things you have need of before you ask Him. So God knows everything we could ask before we ask it. But then if we go ahead and turn to Philippians 4:6, Philippians 4:6, it says, be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. So we've got one verse that says God knows everything we could ask, and then we've got another verse that says we should ask everything in prayer. And so that may seem kind of confusing. Well, if God knows everything, why must I ask? If He knows my intentions and my feelings, and He knows this is an honest request, why do I have to ask Him? Well, and another thing you're going to notice about me, if you've known me long enough, I like illustrations. Like I just did with Joe, I like visual things, and that helps me understand things. When I was thinking about this, I got an illustration in my head, and I shared this with Pastor Matt, and I like this illustration, and I think it works pretty good. I think he knows what I'm talking about. And how I see it is I see a man in his house, and he walks by a garbage can, and this garbage can is filled with trash. I mean, just falling out the top. It's filled with trash. And he walks by it, and then he comes up to his wife. And she looks at him. She gives him one of those looks. She says, didn't you see the trash? Didn't you see it was full? And he says, yeah. And she says, well, why didn't you take it out? And he looks at her, and he says, you didn't ask me. Now, with us, with guys, and I think a lot of us probably experience this could be laziness. On our part, this could be laziness. But one thing I could say is that sometimes it does feel nice to be asked to do something. As humans, we can all think about that. We all have emotions and feelings. Sometimes even though we know it's something that we have to do or we expect that we should do, it feels nice to be asked. Not just to be expected, but someone to come and take the time, and that shows that they respect what we're doing. Now, if we think about God, one thing I would point out, God doesn't have to do squat. He doesn't have to do anything, but we are lucky enough to have a Father in heaven that does. He doesn't have to do anything, but He does. And so instead of just looking at God and saying, well, you see all this trash? You see all these problems? Get to it, God. Instead of doing that, it's important, and it shows our love for God and our respect for God when we take the time and we go into prayer and we ask God. Instead of just saying, hey, you see these things, He can see them. He can see the trash. And I'll tell you, sometimes, and I know this, sometimes it will get so full that He will. He'll come up and He'll take the trash out and He'll pull it up and He'll put it to the curb. But for us, it is a respect, it is an honor that we should show our Father by taking the time, coming into prayer, and asking God. And that's what we get from prayer. And then, sorry, getting a little ahead of my notes. Okay, and then another thing is because how I was thinking this visually in my mind for me to understand this, I was thinking a lot of way of your conversation with God, and I tell the kids a lot of this. When you think what prayer is, I ask them a lot of times, what is prayer? And sometimes they don't, sometimes they kind of stare and think about it, but now, a lot of times now they know me enough that when I ask that question, they look at me and they say, talking with God. And that's what prayer is. It's talking, it's a conversation. And now when you have a conversation with a person, you know, and we've been taught this from, well, most people have been taught this from when they were kids, is courtesy, politeness. Like, you know, when you're a kid, you learn early on, when you come up to your mom, there's a way to talk to your mom. There's a way to talk to teachers. You know how to talk to people and to show them respect. And when we're coming to God, there's the same thing. There's a politeness. There's a way to talk to our Father. And if we go to, let's see, I think it's in Matthew. Yes, Matthew 6, 9 to 13. If we all can turn to Matthew 6, 9 to 13. Now, this is Jesus speaking, and this is what is known as the Lord's Prayer. And whenever I think about prayer, this is pretty much what pops in my head. And I'm going to go ahead and read it. It says, "After this manner, therefore, pray ye. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen." You know what? I could probably do a whole sermon on that verse alone. I mean, there is so much. Like, it's kind of like a picture. When you see a picture now on your computer, you look at a picture and it looks good, but then with all the things they can do on computers, there are thousands of dots in that picture. In this one little picture, there are thousands of dots scattered through that picture. It has so much information. And this simple prayer, there is so much in it. Some people take it and just recite it kind of as a poem. Like God said, this is how to pray, so I pray this. But it's more than that. Like, one thing we can get, like I said, I could examine this and show so much, but one thing you can get is at the beginning, he offers praise to God. He says, "Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." He takes the time and he praises God. It's kind of like when you go in a conversation, and sometimes people do this to you, and it always leaves you kind of feeling, well, what did they do that for? Someone comes up and they just rush into a conversation. They don't say, "Hi, how are you?" They just rush into, "Hey, I need you to do this. I need you to do that." And, you know, I've been guilty of doing, "Dear God, I need this," amen prayer. I've done that. I think we all probably have done one of those. But I tell you, after I do a prayer like that, I don't feel anything. And a lot of times I feel bad about it, and I end up going back and I do a sincere prayer. I come to God, and what I see, one thing I see in a prayer that God gives us is tone. I don't see you being able to say this, "Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." I don't see Jesus as saying it that way. When I see this prayer, I picture a man coming before his God on his knees, saying, "Our Father that art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, in earth as it is in heaven." I mean, there's so much in the tone of that. And I don't think it's really what you say. Because if you think about Moses, Moses was a man who told God that he had a faltering tongue. He had a hard time speaking. But God didn't have a problem with that. He said, "I made your mouth." He did not have a problem with that. So what happened is he talked to Moses, and Moses took off his sandals when he came face to the Lord in the bush. He took off his sandals. He humbled himself, showed respect to the Lord. And so I don't think it's really as much in what you say as how you say it, that you are sincere. You humble yourself. It doesn't matter where you are, that you just kind of let go of the thoughts in your mind. And that can be hard to do. You have work, you have job, you have all these things in your head. But when we come to prayer, it's like a conversation with a person. You can know when you're having a conversation with a person that's just not into it. They're not interested. They've got other things on their mind. When we come and pray with God, we have to think the same thing. We have to let ourselves down, humble ourselves before our God, and speak earnestly and truthfully to God.